It's an unfortunate truth that there are some places that defy explanation, places that cannot be described with words alone, places that have to be experienced to really understand what they really are. I've had dreams of the house at 14 Clay Street in Frost Village since I was a little kid, driving past it with wide-eyed wonder in the back of my grandparents' car. Something about this house has been pulling on me my entire life, until finally, against all odds, I was invited to step inside of it. And the moment I did, everything changed. I found myself in a different dimension, and I wasn't able to get out again. Understand that for me, the opportunity to step inside this house is the equivalent of a religious person making a pilgrimage to the Holy Land. There's a deeply metaphysical connection to it. If there is such a thing as a spiritual echo, this house is a giant amplifier. It is the deepest connection I have with a time, an era, a world, and a story that has consumed me in every way. I felt like I was not worthy of standing where I was standing. And today, I'm going to do my best to explain why. Because history remembers the facts. When it comes to this house, the story has yet to be told. Few women in 19th century Ohio left behind a legacy as controversial, misunderstood, and historically revealing as Anna Walker. Remembered locally as a woman who destroyed one of Tiffin's most prominent marriages with seemingly little effort, she occupied an unusual and, up until I arrived, hidden place in American history. Her name appeared in not only newspaper accounts and court records, but also in the writings of prominent women's rights advocate Matilda Gage, who used Anna's story as evidence of the legal inequalities that governed marriage and divorce during the Gilded Age. Anna's life unfolded against a backdrop of extraordinary social transformation. The United States was entering the industrial age. Women were beginning to organize for expanded rights and suffrage. Political influence, wealth, and social standing were increasingly visible markers of success. Yet the expectations imposed upon women remained rigid and unforgiving by the proverbial boys' club. Anna ultimately achieved wealth, status, and national prominence through her marriage to Judge George Seeney. Yet the same marriage brought decades of public condemnation, social isolation, and legal conflict. Her story illuminates the collision between personal ambition, social morality, and the legal structures of 19th century America. Broader than that, and the odd thing about old cities like this, they don't forget. They simply become selective on what the public is allowed to remember. Wealthy, prominent families, business owners, public servants, and philanthropists might control development, but when it comes to the city's cultural identity and folklore, that power is owned and controlled solely by the storytellers. And the storytellers have a power to alter the perceptions of everything in ways that money can't buy. When it comes to having real power and influence, the truth or the amount of money you have means nothing. Perception is everything. And Anna Walker's story is all about perception. If you are here after watching the first part of this ongoing series on Anna's story, then you are already carrying something with you. An assumption. A version of events that felt complete enough to believe. That version was somewhat wrong, and I did not realize it until I stepped inside this house and learned everything I could about it in the space that Anna lived in. Because everything I thought I understood about Anna Walker, about George Seeney, about this place, collapses the moment you stop reading about them and start standing where Anna once stood. When we finally become two people occupying the same space, at different points in time. When I first told Anna's story, I thought I was telling a love story. A successful, albeit married man fell for a woman from one of Tiffin's founding families and left his wife to be with her. A house built as if it were final proof of something meaningful between them. It felt neat. Almost too neat. But that is what history does when you only see it from a distance. It gives you shapes that feel complete, even when they're not. Tiffin, Ohio is often described as a place built by early families whose name appear again and again in the earliest records. Land, churches, institutions, civic beginnings. Families like Hedges, Lang, Seawald, Albright, Singer, Seeney, and others are repeatedly associated with the early structure of the town. In my historical accounts, they are described as the founding families, meaning families whose influence shaped the early civic, economic, and social development of the region. Fact is that some of them still do today through generational wealth. And what gets built into that kind of structure is not just a town. It's a way of remembering the town. I did not understand that in my video titled Finding Anna. I understand it differently now, because Anna does not sit outside of that structure. She is inside it, and what happened to her unfolds entirely within its boundaries. Born on October 8, 1849, Anna was not in a position to inherit any generational wealth from the Hedges family. Her grandfather and founder of the city, Josiah Hedges, had too many male heirs for anything to make it down the family tree to his granddaughter. If Anna was to achieve any status and security herself, she, like many women in the era, would have to marry into it. Back then, Tiffin was booming, but still had that small-town America aesthetic where everyone knew everyone. Proper suitors were obviously available to court Anna, but Anna was given to a higher standard, likely due to her relationship with George Seeney's then-wife, Isabella Singer. Isabella Singer was by all accounts the queen bee of the time. Isabella's role in Tiffin history is that of a quiet catalyst. She represents the strict, unyielding moral code of early Tiffin. During the mid-19th century, Isabella's father, Frederick Singer, was a deeply rooted and multifaceted figure in Tiffin, Ohio. He was recognized as an essential civic leader and an early artisan entrepreneur. This is the world and family status Isabella came from. On top of all of this, she was married to George Seeney, who was a lawyer and common pleas court judge at the time. This offered Isabella immense community and political power. Isabella had a huge influence over Anna, and as Anna's best friend, guided her through much of her early life. What would eventually lead to Anna's curse was not that she wanted a proper life and security like Isabella had. It was that she wanted to be queen. The scandal of Anna coming between George Seeney and his wife Isabella Singer was the part that everyone remembers. Courtrooms filled with attention that felt less like law and more like performance. Newspaper accounts that carried a tone closer to gossip than documentation. A church and community response that reflected the moral expectations of the time. And at the center of it all, Anna Walker. For over 14 years, George and Isabella lived happily together, during which time Anna was a constant fixture in their home. Isabella and Anna were best friends. The relationship shattered when Isabella gave in to local gossip that Anna had secretly undermined the affections of the judge. A few stories remaining in court proceedings were presented as evidence of this. A bitter, high-profile scandal ensued, and many of the events that unfolded afterwards become part of court records and newspaper articles across the country. Anna was basically accused of seduction, to which Judge Seeney ultimately yielded to, divorcing Isabella to marry the much younger Anna in a secret ceremony in January of 1879 at Anna's parents' house. Anna was 30 years old at the time, and he was 47. Isabella came to challenge Anna in court, arguing for damages of nearly $500,000 by today's standards for the charge of undermining the affections of a husband, which was actually punishable by law back then, because obviously men couldn't be to blame for any of such actions. Isabella lost the court case, but the damage to Anna's reputation had already been done. Anna was no longer someone telling her own story, but as someone being written into one, again and again, until the version of her that survived publicly no longer resembled the person who actually lived through it. And George, by and large, seems to have simply allowed it to happen, while no documented accusations of his own behavior in the matter was levied against him. The most unsettling part is how quietly that transformation can happen. Not in a single moment, but in repetition, until it feels permanent. George remains in the records differently. No one can ignore that. Not because I'm trying to assign meaning where there is none, but because the structure of memory itself is uneven. Anna becomes the focus of consequence. George becomes the focus of continuity. And that imbalance changes the emotional shape of everything that follows. George Senior is widely recorded in local and political history as a prominent legal and public figure of his time associated with wealth, civic influence, and national political service. In his standard accounts, his public reputation remains largely intact, as was common for men of his position in 19th century political life. But the record also shows that his first marriage ended in a highly public divorce, followed by allegations and counter-allegations involving Anna. These proceedings were widely reported in Ohio newspapers at the time and became part of public discourse surrounding the three individuals involved. Anna was the one who remained physically present in Tiffin during much of the public fallout. George's political and legal career, including periods spent outside of the area for business, and also for the simple fact that he was a man, meant that responsibility and public scrutiny were not experienced equally between them. Anna was just the easier target. Anna was ostracized by local high society. Neighbors and prominent community members refused to associate with her or acknowledge her new status as the judge's wife. This kind of rejection wasn't always a dramatic display. It was subtle. Like walking into a room and hearing people in the corner whispering about you and not being able to quite make out what they're saying. So you feel embarrassed without really knowing why. Sometimes that can be worse than a direct confrontation which you could answer in turn. Keep in mind the mindset and moral compass of the times. This was the Gilded Age of America, the Victorian era. Standards for behavior were much different back then, and more often than not, extreme religious convictions only added fuel to the fire of anyone breaking the social customs of the times. For that time period and the mindset they had, what George and Anna had done was against everything everyone believed in. So it is expected that they would have a negative reaction to it. A respite from this came when George and Anna moved to Washington, D.C. during his terms in Congress. While living in Washington, Anna lived out a fair, high society, unjudged life where the scandal back in Tiffin held no influence. While in D.C., Anna was the queen she wanted to be, even getting published and recognized in D.C. newspapers. After George's congressional terms ended, they returned to Tiffin and built a house as a statement. But even after their years away from the city, the locals were not going to forgive or forget the scandal that started it all. Despite living in one of the most opulent estates in the region, Anna never received visitors, guests, or local callers. She often lived inside the mansion in near total isolation. Imagine sending out invites to the community, inviting everyone to come and see your new home, only to have no one show up. I think many people today feel at least some version of this sort of isolation. And George and Anna might have experienced the same kind of dull social disappointment. Then there is the house itself. The place I once thought represented a rival. A life built, a story completed, a romantic ending made visible in wood and stone. The longer I remain here, the less convincing that interpretation becomes. Because houses do not only record what people built, they record what remained after everything else began to fall away. And this house feels like that second thing. Not the beginning, but aftermath. The Senior House, historically called the Senior Walker House, is a prominent locally preserved Queen Anne-style home built in 1896 by Judge Sini. Located near the river in Tiffen, it is one of the city's celebrated historic properties. Queen Anne-style homes are iconic, highly ornate Victorian-era properties that peaked in popularity between 1880 and 1910. Famous for their asymmetrical facades, deep roofs, and decorative trim, these homes showcase the era's craftsmanship and technological advances in mass-produced wood details. Maintaining and operating daily life inside of a home of this magnitude was often a full-time job unto itself, requiring servants and staff to keep up with its demands. Here, staff were offered their own personal quarters at the back of the house where they had quick access to the kitchen area, pantries, and very likely vegetable and herb garden in the backyard. Anna could have had several full-time staff members in the home with her to help her manage it while George would have been off somewhere tending to business, his legal practice, or his never-ending chase for clout, status, and higher social standing. Things Anna had become detrimental to. Because where George worked to achieve his status, Anna effectively, in the eyes of many, simply stole it by marrying into it and stealing it away from Isabella. The magnitude of work and cost just to maintain a house of this size is insane. In the Victorian era had much stricter practices and expectations of how a home should be presented than we do today, even if no one ever actually saw it. A house of this magnitude almost guarantees that Anna was a very busy woman just keeping up with the daily chores, even when she did have help. In learning about Anna, I no longer feel like George built the house as a simple gift for her in an effort to bring her back into favor with society. It feels more like a structure tied to status, permanence, and social position within the world he occupied. The house was a statement to the community. It was the manifestation of a man's pride and ego. I find myself wishing George had spoken more publicly in Anna's defense. Whether such defense never happened or simply hasn't survived the historical record, I can't say. But standing in the home they built together, I can't help but wondering what burdens they carried behind these walls. In this light, the house slowly becomes less like a home and more like a place where beauty and isolation begin to overlap. A gilded cage is still a cage. The founding families were deeply embedded in the social and economic structure of the town. Like many communities of the era, social standing, reputation, and belonging were tightly interwoven, and exclusion from that inner circle that was dominated by men often operated through informal networks rather than formal decree. This too is still quietly prevalent today, though no one mentions it. What no one really explains about reputational collapse is that it does not end when people stop speaking about you. It continues quietly, in who still visits, and who no longer does, in which rooms are used, and which rooms are avoided without anyone needing to say why, until a life that once felt shared begins to feel narrowed, not by force, but by absence. And I find myself thinking about Anna inside that narrowing, not during the scandal, but after it, when the noise had already finished speaking for her, when what remained was simply living inside what others had decided she was. The social status, the wealth, the rooms full of pretty things, the house, all of the stuff that money can buy. At times Anna might have given it all up at any moment without hesitation in exchange for just one person to really connect with. One person who genuinely wanted to know her side of the story and the woman she was beyond all of the scandal. Just one person who, without any hidden agenda, wants, or expectations of her, simply cared enough to ask. And in the end, she gave it all up. For Anna, none of the things that money could buy really mattered at all. They were just things, and you can't take them with you. George is what mattered. And the day came when George was no longer there. When George died in 1905, I expected things to settle. They did not. They shifted. Anna sold the house in 1908, not as collapse, not as defeat, but as a decision. It was less like retreat and more like refusal. Not of life, but of the version of life that had been constructed around her. She left it all behind and moved to the Shawhan Hotel, a space defined by impermanence rather than legacy, a place where belonging is temporary by design. That choice has stayed with me longer than anything else in the story, because it suggests something quiet but firm. She was done participating in the version of her life that others had written. Whatever her motivations were for her affair with George, be it personal ambition or actual love, became irrelevant. Once George passed away, everything for Anna became irrelevant. But her battles didn't end there. After George's death, estate-related legal matters did occur, as is common with large 19th century estates. Anna rejected everything that George had left her in his will and simply took a portion of funds from his estate to sustain herself. Everything else, she simply let go of. This action offers us an important insight to how Anna felt about her life with George. It suggests that her motivations were never about possessions, property, power, or wealth. After George died, the Sini family almost immediately went after Anna in court in a case titled Sini versus Schroth for money they felt she was not entitled to, offering a glimpse into how George's family really felt about her and how greedy people can become. Those very court hearings set the foundation for how gifted wealth is transferred in Ohio today. But the most important details is not the litigation itself. It's that Anna ultimately removed herself from the entire structure. Not only the house and the wealth, but the narrative. This was her declaration that she would be pushed this far and no further. That she no longer cared how anyone else in the world felt about what she had done or how her story would end. After living almost her entire life being judged and in subtle isolation, Anna wanted nothing more than to be left alone. This may have been due in part to the fact that she had been diagnosed with a carcinoma, likely a form of breast cancer. Within a year and a half after Anna received her cancer diagnosis, she suffered from acute kidney failure, which within 5 days of onset led to her death on April 29, 1909. After Anna died, her story did not end there. It simply paused and was all but forgotten in public memory until I walked back into town. Anna has waited 114 years for this video series to be made. My video titled Finding Anna focused on what I believed a beautiful house represented, a kind of romantic architecture, a monument to a life built between two people who were misunderstood by the world around them. But the more I learn about the time period and the house itself, the more it feels as if the house was built as the final exclamation point in the story. It stands as an act of defiance in the face of adversity. George may not be on record publicly defending Anna against the scandal that started their relationship, but this house is a public statement of a much more powerful sort. A statement that needs no caption, one that cannot be ignored or erased. It stands there, in all of its pride and majesty, daring anyone to pass judgment, just to show them how powerless their judgment really is. This ongoing account is not an official record of stale, lifeless facts. This is the other thing, the thing that history ignores. This is less about how events unfolded and how they actually felt to have them unfold on top of you. George Sini was not a private citizen. He was a lawyer, judge, later a U.S. congressman, and a prominent public figure in Tiffin. A man in that position would have been very aware that any public defense of Anna could create another wave of attention. George may have been a man who made one enormous public declaration by choosing Anna, then spent the following decades refusing to explain himself. That silence itself becomes part of the story, and it reveals more about George's position on Anna than the house itself does. But the house echoes with Anna's emotions, everything she felt while living inside of it, from her moments of steely defiant resolve to the times when, alone in her bedroom, different emotions were allowed to come out. All very common for women in that time period when emotions were often suppressed with expectations, discipline, and a strict code of public conduct that in my personal view was unfair to the extreme. Having the opportunity to step inside this house is something I'll never be able to repay or express with words just how much it means. I am forever grateful for those involved in allowing me this opportunity to not only have a childhood dream come true, but this current one as well. My love for this house has little to do with its construction history or grand architecture. It's my unexplainable lifelong connection to it. Maybe what I was feeling when I passed by this house as a little kid wasn't a childish fairy tale fantasy. Maybe it was something else. Something that had to wait for me to grow up, live through all that I have, and become the thing that I am now to really understand it. And now I do. This lifelong journey was never about the house at all, and there is still so much more of this story to tell.